Hydrogen peroxide will help your seeds germinate faster and will promote healthy growth. This is because when the hydrogen peroxide breaks down, it releases oxygen. Since a high level of oxygen is a necessary ingredient for sprouting seeds, the extra oxygen supply is exceptionally beneficial to new growth.
There is a bottle sitting in your home right now that could save every plant you have ever lost. Not something from a garden center. Not something that costs $20 with a label full of warnings you never finish reading. Something cheaper than a candy bar. Something so ordinary, so overlooked, that most gardeners walk past it every single day without a second thought. It is the brown bottle under your bathroom sink. Hydrogen peroxide, 3%. The same thing you dabbed on a scraped knee and then forgot about. That bottle has been sitting there quietly, and the entire time it has been sitting there, it has been capable of doing something that the gardening industry has spent decades hoping you would never figure out. Here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. The people who sell you fungicides know. The manufacturers behind those colorful bottles at the garden center, the ones charging $15, $20, sometimes $30 for a spray that works for 3 days and then sends you back to the shelf, they know exactly what hydrogen peroxide can do. They have always known. And the reason nobody in that industry has ever pulled you aside and told you the truth is the same reason any business protects its most profitable secret. You not knowing is worth money to them. That changes today. What is about to be laid out in this video is not a hack. It is not a shortcut. It is the result of watching gardeners pour money into treatments that failed, season after season, while the real solution sat in plain sight, priced at less than a cup of coffee. Every use, every ratio, every protocol that actually works, all of it right here. But before getting into the how, there is something that needs to be understood about the why. Because once the mechanism behind hydrogen peroxide is clear, once it is understood what this compound actually does the moment it touches a plant pathogen, a pest larvae, a waterlogged root system, everything changes. The way a garden is looked at changes. The way money gets spent at the garden center changes. And the way dying plants are seen changes most of all. Stay with this, because later in this video, there is going to be a step-by-step walkthrough of how to rescue a plant with active root rot. A plant that most gardeners would have already thrown in the trash. And it comes back.
I recently learned that hydrogen peroxide deteriorates pretty rapidly when exposed to sunlight.
With something from the drugstore that cost less than $2. Do not leave before getting there. Hi viewers, quick question before moving forward. Have you ever watched a plant slowly die and had absolutely no idea what was killing it? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now. Now, let's talk about what is actually inside that brown bottle, and why the chemistry of it is the most important thing a gardener can understand. The brown bottle contains water, and one extra atom. That is it. That is the entire secret. H2O2. 2 hydrogen atoms. 2 oxygen atoms. Regular water is H2O. The only difference between the liquid that sustains life and the compound that is about to transform a garden is a single oxygen atom bonded to the end of the molecule. One atom. And that one atom is the reason everything changes. Here is what happens the instant hydrogen peroxide contacts organic material. A fungal cell wall. A harmful bacterial membrane. The soft body of a pest larvae buried in the top layer of moist soil. The moment contact is made, that extra oxygen atom releases. It does not negotiate. It does not gradually weaken its target over several applications. It oxidizes. It ruptures. It destroys the cellular structure of whatever pathogen it touches in a single, immediate chemical reaction. And then something remarkable happens. It disappears. Not into the soil. Not into the leaf tissue. Not into the water table underneath a garden bed. It breaks down completely into water and oxygen. Nothing left behind. No chemical residue accumulating in the root zone over weeks of repeated application.
These cucumbers are suffering from downy mildew. Mix 6 ounces of peroxide per gallon of water. You might want to do a test spray the day prior. Just spray it on one leaf, let it sit for 24 hours, and then on actual spray day, soak all of the leaves, top and bottom. You can see that the new growth after spraying is now not affected. And it isn't going to fix the leaves that are damaged, but weekly spraying will help keep the new leaves healthy.
No toxic buildup that quietly disrupts the microbial life that makes healthy soil function. Just water and air. Now hold that thought next to what is sitting on the shelf at the garden center. Those bottles, the ones with the dense warning labels, the ones recommending gloves and eye protection and keeping children and pets away from treated areas, those compounds do not disappear after application. They persist. They accumulate. Every time that spray is applied to a plant, a residue is being left behind that the soil has to process, that the beneficial fungi and bacteria living in the root zone have to survive. And over time, that accumulation weakens the very biological system that a garden depends on to stay healthy. A chemically dependent garden is a permanently vulnerable garden. That is not an accident. That is the model. What hydrogen peroxide does is the opposite. It does not weaken the soil environment. It does not leave behind anything that disrupts the living biology beneath the surface. It heals the environment and then it steps aside. And for gardeners who have been treating the same fungal infections, the same root problems, the same pest pressures season after season without ever getting ahead of them, that distinction is everything. Now here is the part that no one in the industry finds convenient. Hydrogen peroxide does not just kill pathogens. It does something no synthetic fungicide on any shelf anywhere claims to do. It reoxygenates the soil at the same time. While it is destroying the organisms that are harming the roots, it is simultaneously pushing oxygen back into the root zone. It is fixing the environment that allowed the problem to develop in the first place. That is not a treatment. That is a reset. And understanding that is the difference between a gardener who keeps losing plants to the same problems every season and a gardener who stops losing plants entirely. The science is not complicated. But what it implies about everything being sold at the garden center is deeply inconvenient for the people profiting from continued ignorance. Stay with this, because the first application, and the one that has saved more plants than any other, is coming next. And it starts underground, where no one can see the damage until it is almost too late. There is a moment every gardener has experienced and never fully understood. A plant looks healthy on a Tuesday, leaves full, color good, standing upright in the container. By Friday it is drooping. By the following week it is yellowing from the bottom up, dropping leaves, collapsing despite being watered, despite being in good light, despite everything being done right on the surface. And the instinct is to water it more. That instinct is exactly what finishes it off. What is happening underground in that scenario is root rot. And the cruel, devastating irony of root rot is that a plant suffering from it will wilt and display every symptom of drought stress, even when the soil around it is completely saturated. Because the roots are no longer functioning. They cannot take up water. They cannot pull in nutrients. The vascular system of the plant is shutting down from the bottom, and by the time the symptoms appear above the soil line, the damage has been building underground for weeks. Most gardeners never know what hit them. Root rot is not caused by water alone. It is caused by anaerobic conditions. When soil stays wet too long, from overwatering, from poor drainage, from compacted growing medium that holds moisture without releasing it, the oxygen gets pushed out of the root zone. And when the oxygen leaves, specific organisms move in to fill the space. Phytophthora, Pythium, Fusarium. These are the primary anaerobic pathogens responsible for root rot in container plants, raised beds, and in-ground plantings across nearly every growing region. They do not need light. They do not need airflow. They thrive in the exact conditions that poor watering habits and dense soil create. And they work silently, below the surface, until the plant above has almost nothing left. Here is where hydrogen peroxide does something that nothing on the garden center shelf can replicate. When a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution is drenched into the soil, two things happen at once. The free oxygen released on contact with organic matter is lethal to anaerobic pathogens. Organisms that cannot survive in an oxygenated environment do not survive. They are not suppressed. They are not temporarily set back. They are destroyed on contact. At the same time, and this is critical, the oxygen being released back into the soil is doing the second job simultaneously. It is re-aerating the root zone. It is creating exactly the conditions that beneficial root tissue needs to begin recovering. Oxygen-rich soil stimulates new root growth. It restores the biological environment that anaerobic pathogens destroyed. It is killing the disease and healing the ground at the same time. Gardeners who apply this correctly often see visible improvement within days. Not weeks, days. Container plants that were collapsing. Tomatoes in raised beds that had stopped producing. Indoor tropicals that were yellowing from the roots up. Saved. With a solution that costs less than $2 and takes 5 minutes to mix and apply. For a routine root health drench, 4 tablespoons of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide goes into 1 liter of water. That is the maintenance ratio. Apply it when the top layer of the growing medium has dried slightly. Then allow the soil to dry completely before the next watering. Let the oxygen do its work. Do not interrupt it by keeping the soil wet. For a plant already showing severe root rot symptoms, the protocol is more aggressive. Remove the plant from its container if possible. Inspect the roots. Healthy roots are white or light tan and firm. Compromised roots are brown, soft, and may have an unpleasant smell. Trim away any roots that have completely lost structural integrity. Then soak the remaining root system in a solution of 3% hydrogen peroxide and water, 1 part peroxide to 2 parts water, for no longer than 30 minutes. Repot into fresh, well-draining medium. Drench the new soil with the maintenance solution. Place the plant in a location with indirect light and reduced watering frequency. Then wait. The recovery is not instant, but it is real. And it happens with something from the drugstore shelf, not from a bottle that requires safety equipment and leaves a residue behind in the soil for the next 6 weeks. This is what 25 years of watching gardeners spend money on the wrong solutions looks like when it finally gets corrected. 1 plant at a time. 1 brown bottle at a time. But root rot is only the beginning. Because what is happening above the soil, on the surface of the leaves, on the stems, inside the crowns of the plants, is a different category of problem entirely. And the industry has built an even more profitable system around keeping that one misunderstood. Walk into any garden center in any part of the country and find the fungicide aisle. Count the bottles. Count the price tags. Then read the active ingredients on the back of 3 different products. The chemistry will be different. The brand names will be different. The promises on the front of the labels will be different. But the experience of the gardener who buys them will almost always be the same. 3 days of visible improvement. Then the disease comes back. Then back to the shelf. That cycle is not a failure of the product. It is the design of the product. Powdery mildew on squash. Rust on roses. Early blight and late blight working through a tomato planting that took months to establish. These are living organisms. Fungal pathogens colonizing leaf surfaces, sporulating, spreading to neighboring plants, traveling on hands and tools and water droplets. They are not passive. They are aggressive. And the chemical treatments sold at retail price points are formulated to suppress them temporarily, not to eliminate them. Hydrogen peroxide does not suppress. When the oxidizing action of a diluted hydrogen peroxide spray contacts a fungal pathogen on a leaf surface, it ruptures the cell wall of the organism on contact. The pathogen does not adapt. It does not build resistance. It does not slow down and recover after the treatment wears off. Contact is made, oxidation occurs, and the organism is finished. And because the compound breaks down into water and oxygen after application, there is no residue left on the leaf surface that accumulates in the plant tissue over repeated treatments. Now, a truth that matters. Hydrogen peroxide is a contact treatment. It reaches what the spray physically touches. It does not travel systemically through the plant's vascular tissue the way some chemical fungicides claim to. This means application technique is everything. The undersides of leaves must be coated. The stems, the crowns, the base of the plant where moisture collects. Fungal spores colonize the sheltered surfaces of foliage specifically because those surfaces are protected from UV light and airflow. Spraying only the tops of leaves and walking away is the reason treatments fail. It is not the compound that fails. It is the coverage. Use a pump sprayer. Take time with every plant, every surface, every angle. For disease prevention, half a cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide goes into 1 gallon of water. That is the maintenance foliar spray. Apply it as a routine measure before problems appear, especially during humid stretches or after rain events that create ideal conditions for fungal spread. For an active infection already visible on the plant, the concentration increases. 8 to 12 tablespoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Spray for 3 consecutive days. Then on day 4, rotate to a preventative, baking soda solution, diluted neem oil, or a sulfur-based spray. That rotation is what actually stops an outbreak from cycling back. No single application of anything eliminates a fungal problem permanently. Rotation and consistency are what breaks the cycle. Now, pests. Fungus gnats are the most underestimated problem in container gardening, and nobody talks about this honestly enough. The adult flies look harmless. They hover around the soil surface and they seem like a nuisance. Nothing more. The larvae are the real story. They live in the top layer of moist growing medium and they feed on organic matter and on plant roots. In a container with a young seedling or a recently transplanted specimen, a larval infestation causes the exact same symptoms as root rot: wilting, yellowing, failure to establish, and sticky traps. The standard recommendation: catch adults. They do absolutely nothing about what is happening beneath the soil surface. A hydrogen peroxide drench ends the larval population. 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 4 parts water. Allow the top inch of soil to dry before applying. This matters because dry conditions bring larvae closer to the surface where they are most exposed to the solution. Drench thoroughly. The fizzing that appears at the soil surface is the oxidation reaction working through organic material. Apply every 5 to 7 days for 2 to 3 consecutive weeks until no new adults are emerging from the soil. For aphids and spider mites above ground, the foliar spray creates surface conditions that soft-bodied insects find actively hostile. It is not an instant contact kill the way insecticidal soap is, but as a preventative measure applied consistently, it disrupts the leaf surface environment that makes a garden an attractive feeding target. And here is where something surprising enters the picture. Something that reframes the entire conversation about why hydrogen peroxide works so differently from everything being sold in those garden center aisles. Something that goes back millions of years. Back to the first thunderstorm that ever rolled across a field of plants. The industry does not want this part of the story told, because once it is understood, the entire premise of synthetic chemical dependency in the garden collapses. Think about the last time a real storm rolled through. Not a drizzle. A genuine downpour with lightning, heavy rain, wind moving through the canopy of the garden. And think about what the plants looked like the following morning. Alive in a way they had not been the day before. Fuller, greener, standing differently. Every gardener has noticed this, and almost every gardener has credited the rainfall. More water reaching the roots. The explanation seems obvious. But it is incomplete, because what is actually happening during a thunderstorm involves something happening in the atmosphere that the gardening industry has never once mentioned in a product label or a retail display. Lightning activity produces ozone and peroxides in the atmosphere. Those compounds dissolve into rainfall as it moves through the air, and they reach the ground in the water that soaks into the soil. Rainwater, especially storm rainwater, contains dissolved oxygen and trace concentrations of hydrogen peroxide. Plants did not evolve in a sterile, chemically neutral environment. They evolved in a world where periodic peroxide-enhanced rain was a natural, recurring event. The dramatic improvement visible in a garden after a real storm is not just about hydration. It is about oxygenation. It is about the soil receiving a flush of oxygen-rich, naturally occurring peroxide that no amount of gentle watering from a garden hose replicates. When hydrogen peroxide is added to a watering routine, the soil is being given back something it was always meant to receive. This is not adding something foreign to a garden. This is restoring something ancient. And for plants grown in containers, in raised beds with soil that compacts over a season, in indoor growing environments where a real thunderstorm never reaches the root zone, that restoration matters enormously. Oxygen-rich soil produces more active root systems, more metabolically efficient root systems that pull in nutrients more effectively, that support stronger above-ground growth, that resist the conditions that allow pathogens to establish in the first place. The seeds that sit in germination trays and never sprout are part of this same story. Every gardener has experienced this. The packet says 14 days. Day 14 passes. Day 20 passes. The soil is disturbed gently to check. The seed is still there, swollen, unchanged, not growing. The failure can come from temperature, from depth, from inconsistent moisture. But one of the most common and least discussed causes is surface contamination on the seed itself. Commercially harvested and packaged seeds can carry bacteria and mold organisms on the seed coat. In the warm, moist environment of a germination setup, those organisms compete with and can overwhelm the embryo before it ever establishes. A 30-minute pre-soak in a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution before planting does two things simultaneously. It eliminates surface contamination on the seed coat, and it softens the outer layer of the seed, the protective shell that slows moisture absorption during dormancy, accelerating the point at which the embryo can begin taking in water and initiating germination. The embryo inside is not harmed. The organisms on the surface are gone, and germination speed on difficult seeds, on old seeds, on varieties with notoriously dense seed coats, improves in ways that are visible and measurable. 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. Soak for 30 minutes. Plant immediately after. The tools being used in the garden are disease vectors. That is not an exaggeration. The pruning shears used on a rose showing black spot last week, if they were not cleaned before being used on the next plant, carried the pathogen directly to a new host. The container that held a plant lost to root rot last season, rinsed with water and refilled with fresh soil, still carries the organisms that caused the original infection on its interior surfaces. Hydrogen peroxide used undiluted from the 3% bottle wipes down cutting tool blades between plants. It does not corrode metal over time the way bleach does. For containers, 1 part peroxide to 1 part water applied to the interior surface, left for 10 minutes, then rinsed, eliminates the pathogens from the previous season before anything new is planted into it. For greenhouse surfaces, benches, propagation trays, irrigation components, a pump sprayer with a stronger solution handles the pre-season sanitation that protects every plant going into the space before it ever goes in. Bleach is the alternative most gardeners have heard recommended. And bleach works, but it leaves chlorine residue that is not neutral to plant roots and it degrades metal components over time. Hydrogen peroxide leaves nothing. It breaks down and disappears. The choice between them is not close. An old potting soil, the soil from a container where a plant struggled, the bag of mix from an unknown source. It does not have to be thrown away. 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water, drenched thoroughly through the entire volume of growing medium, allowed to sit for 24 to 48 hours before replanting, eliminates the dormant organisms inside it. The peroxide breaks down completely in that window. What remains in the soil after 48 hours is extra oxygen, which, as is now understood, is exactly where a healthy root system begins. For gardeners who have moved into hydroponic or aquaponic growing, hydrogen peroxide is not a supplement. It is a necessity. Warm, recirculating, nutrient-dense water is an ideal environment for algae colonization and for Pythium, the root rot pathogen that destroys hydroponic crops faster than almost anything else. Adding hydrogen peroxide to the reservoir keeps dissolved oxygen levels elevated, prevents biofilm from colonizing the tubing and root chambers, and disrupts the conditions that allow algae to establish. It is the single most cost-effective maintenance tool available to any grower running a water-based system. Now, the question nobody asks, not how to treat the garden, not which spray to use on which disease. The question underneath all of this, the one that, once it is asked out loud, makes everything that has been laid out in this video suddenly connect into a single coherent picture. Why does the garden keep getting sick? A garden that requires constant chemical intervention is a garden whose biological foundation has been disrupted. Every synthetic fungicide applied, every pesticide used that leaves behind residue in the soil, every treatment that does not break down completely after application, it weakens the microbial ecosystem that healthy soil depends on to function. Beneficial bacteria, mycorrhizal fungi, the living network beneath the surface that moves nutrients, breaks down organic matter, supports root health, and creates natural resistance to the pathogens that cause disease. That ecosystem, when it is functioning, is the real protection. It is the defense system the garden was always meant to have. Chemical dependency does not just fail to restore that system. It actively continues to degrade it. Hydrogen peroxide does not participate in that cycle. It treats the problem. It restores the oxygen environment. It breaks down into nothing harmful. And it steps aside, leaving the biological system of the soil intact and able to rebuild. This is not a product. It is a philosophy, a different way of understanding what a garden actually needs and what has been sold as a substitute for it for decades. 25 years of watching the same mistakes repeated, the same money spent, the same plants lost, and the same brown bottle sitting on the shelf at the drugstore, bought for pocket change, used once and forgotten. That ends here. The full protocol. Weekly maintenance soil drench at the 4 tablespoon per liter ratio. Foliar spray rotation during humid seasons and whenever disease pressure appears. Pre-planting seed soak for any variety with a history of poor germination. Tool and container sanitation before every season and between every diseased plant. Soil reuse with a full drench and a 48-hour rest period before planting. That system, applied consistently, changes what a garden looks like over a full season. And it does it without a single bottle that requires a warning label. Tell the story of which use surprised you most. Drop it in the comments. And drop what is being grown right now, because next week the second bottle is coming. The one that belongs right next to the hydrogen peroxide on the shelf. The one that works differently but solves the single problem this entire video did not address. A problem that quietly affects more gardens than root rot, more gardens than powdery mildew, more gardens than fungus gnats, and almost nobody has connected it to its actual cause.